All right. Looks like it worked.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. This is the February 1st meeting of the Science and Data Subcommittee of the Vermont Climate Council. My name is Jared Duvall, and Colin Smythe, fellow co-chair, and I put together an agenda for this meeting, which I'll just briefly go over, and then we can see if there's any proposed additions and get right into the meeting. So we've got some minutes to review and approve. We also, before we get too far, need to identify a note taker for this meeting. We're kind of doing that on a rotating volunteer basis. So if, as I'm going through the rest of the agenda, if somebody could think if they'd be willing to volunteer to do that, that would be incredibly helpful. The main first part of the agenda is getting some updates on a lot of work that was kind of scoped out and moved forward with requests for proposals. And I think a number of those contracts have been signed and are beginning to move forward. So learning where those stand, their timelines, and how folks on this committee and this committee as a whole will be involved in some of those different projects was a main area that we wanted to spend some time on. Then we've got some time for updates from Brian and the on behalf of ANR and the Climate Action Office on the reporting program discussions and progress. I think an update from Colin on the forthcoming greenhouse gas inventory for Vermont. And then we've got time for updates from subcommittee liaisons with other council committees. And then we've got some time for discussing future scheduling for our subcommittee and public comment. We may end up adjourning a little bit early, but we'll see. But with that, before we move to approval of the minutes, I want to see if anybody is willing to take notes for today's meeting. Jane is.
I'm not willing to take notes.
You're not volunteering. It's something else.
I had an agenda request, but you should handle that first.
Jared, I will just note that that I received an idea before the meeting about potentially doing the note-taking duties kind of just on a rotating basis by alphabetical order. I don't know how people feel about that, but I guess we can maybe see how that goes depending on if we get any volunteers.
Yeah, my recollection is that the last person who volunteered is Jared Ulmer. Thank you, Jared. So we could either just go alphabetically after him so it gets around to him last. So I don't know. There's a V or a W, X, Y, Z. Maybe we're going back to A in terms of committee members. All right, if no one volunteers, I think we should do that and then take a second to figure out who that would be alphabetically.
It's like a tie between you, Jared, and Leslie Ann. But I think Leslie Ann is in front of you if the P comes before the V.
I was afraid you're going to say that, Jane. Okay, I take copious notes, so happy to do it if nobody else wants to do it. And then you can pare down appropriately.
Thank you, Leslie Ann. And then for our next meeting, when it's me, I'll just ask you, Colin, to do more of the agenda and facilitation stuff, so I'm not trying to juggle too much. Thank you for stepping up.
And I can just say, we can also provide the recording as well afterwards if you'd rather not do it in real time, and for anybody, not just for you, Leslie.
Real time's better. You remember what my schedule looks like.
Yeah.
So thank you. That's great. So I think the next thing that's up on our agenda is the approval of the minutes from our December 13th meeting, which were linked in the agenda and were posted in the chat. Thank you, Colin.
Sure. Sorry, I'll just note on that, Jared. The ones posted in the chat, at the last meeting, we had discussed the minutes were never done for the October 6th meeting either. And so I put those together. And so but I did not do that in time to link them in the agenda. So those are the ones that I posted in the chat, and the ones in the agenda, which I can also post in the chat, are the December 13th ones. I'll drop those in the chat too, if you give me one more second to do that.
Yeah, let's just give folks a minute, since those are new, just to review those October ones, and then maybe we can consider these back to back.
Colin, would you mind reposting the two links for anybody who might have joined a little bit late? Thanks.
Oh, sure. I'm sorry. I thought I set the meeting up so people could see the chats before they got on, but I must not have actually hit that button. But yes, give me 1 second and I will drop them back in there.
Many thanks.
Sure thing.
Great. Give one more minute just to make sure folks are comfortable with those. If they see any errors or omissions that we should change before formally approving them. Let's just start with October 6th. Does anyone have any, anyone not okay with approving the minutes as drafted for October 6th? Okay, hearing no response, I think we can consider those adopted unless someone wants to request more time. And then would move to the minutes for December 13th. Is there anyone who is not comfortable approving those minutes as drafted? Okay. Hearing no response, I think we'll consider both of those sets of minutes approved. I think at this point we can turn it over to you, Colin, to begin the updates on a lot of the contractual work that has been moving forward.
Sure. Thanks, Jared. So I'm gonna kick us off. Oh, sorry, Jane, did you want to make your agenda request here first?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, since the council hasn't met in a while and there is some upcoming bigger council business to adhere to, I wasn't sure if people were interested in adding a council update to the agenda.
Yes. Yes, please.
Sounds great.
Happy to do it whenever.
Would you be willing to do that now, Jane, before we kind of get in everything else? Does that work?
That's probably good context before we dive in.
Right.
Great, and others should fill in for me as we go, but just so folks know, the council hasn't met for a substantive meeting really since November. The council came together for a short meeting in January, largely because the council has a legislative report due via the Global Warming Solutions Act on January 15th. And so the council canceled its December meeting largely because 8 councilors who were the House appointed councilors terms expired in November. And so we were shy 8 councilors for a December meeting. We are able to meet, and quorum is based on the number of sitting councilors, but it was clearly the intention that legislative appointments would have the majority on the council, and without those 8 councilors, the administration would have majority on the council. Not to mention those 8 seats represent really important sectors that have a critical voice in many of the proposals that were coming forward to the council. So for numerous important reasons, the council didn't meet in December. 6 of those 8 seats have now been either reappointed or new appointments have come forward. We're still missing 2 seats. The seat that represents municipalities, and then the seat that represents fuel dealers. And so those applications are still being taken by the speaker, and there's an open application on her website. And so I'm pleased to say that Dr. Leslie Ann Dupini-Giroux is reappointed to the council and sits on your subcommittee, and many other seats were refilled by folks like Liz Miller, Rich Cowart, Joey Miller. I can't remember all of them, but right now off the top of my head, but it's really Brian Gray, Chris Campany, and Catherine Dimitrick are the 3 sort of exiting counselors. And so the only new counselor as of yet is David Dean, and David Dean will represent rural communities, technically the seat that he's filling. So I think that those 2 seats that are still left to be appointed are really critical. And we're hopeful that the Speaker of the House will appoint those 2 seats in the next few weeks. But we have moved forward with scheduling a more substantive council meeting for March 13th, really stepping back from sort of like day-to-day work of the council and taking stock of sort of the processes that we put in place early on in the council, like the process roadmap. We'll have to reappoint a new steering committee member because Chris Campany sat on the steering committee, and really looking at sort of the work planning for the council between now and the next iteration of the climate action plan, which it's hard for me to even say this out loud, but is actually due in just over 2 years. So I'm like really trying to understand like what the council wants to do between now and the next complete redo of the climate action plan, which is due July 1st of 2025. So that March meeting will be the first time the council has ever met in person, which I think is also really exciting. That again, will really look at process. And so for interest that many of you have been involved in, I anticipate scheduling another council meeting shortly thereafter that would take up things like the biomass recommendations, which have been on hold, and I think are critical to not sort of let lie for too long, knowing that there was a lot of work that went into them and really a lot of interest to see those taken up and deliberated on by the council. So that won't happen at the March meeting. I think that is really important for that March meeting to just be about process and sort of like where we're going. And then we'll schedule another meeting shortly thereafter. Of course, the steering committee is meeting in the coming weeks, and they may disagree with me and say that the biomass recommendations should come right away. But I think it's important to sort of, and we'll articulate that, I think it's important to sort of separate out business from like a really high level conversation about the council and process and procedure. But of course, it may change. So just thought I would give that update for all of you. I know that there's been press lately about both biomass. There was a story on WCAX about the biomass recommendations last week. And then there was also the story that was about the council and equity. I can drop both of those in the chat for people, and as well as the council legislative report if you're interested in seeing any of that. And the component on equity is something that I think the Just Transitions Committee will be talking quite a bit about at their February 16th meeting, and have some solid recommendations to bring to the council on sort of where to go from that conversation. So there's been a lot of email conversation about that. So look forward to sort of picking back up the work with the council. And for now, yeah, that's sort of where we're at.
Great. Thanks, Jane. Jared, go ahead.
Any questions for Jane? I know I have one that's just kind of a logistics question, Jane, which is for setting up the in-person meeting in March. My presumption is that that is a public meeting, but I don't know if there's any space. I'm thinking it's primarily for counselors, But I'm wondering if there are interested subcommittee members who wanted to attend. Would there be space in person, or is there kind of a Zoom link for folks to kind of watch that meeting? I'm just wondering how that's been thought about to date.
Yeah, so the room itself holds 70 people. And so there's space for some to come. I will just note on the website, if I haven't already, that it'll be capped at 70, but don't expect that we would hit that, but I don't know, maybe. But there is a Zoom link also, and the room is really well equipped with like the moving cameras when people are talking and the screen and the mics. So it's a great room to try to do our best with hybrid. My intent is to ask another A&R staff member who we often hold A&R meetings there. And there's a couple staff member who often run the technology for us. I'm not very good at that. So I'm going to ask some of the people in A&R who are very good at technology to support the meeting to do that for us.
And is it right on the count? It says, I think, the Agency of Transportation conference room in Berlin.
Yeah, it's right near the Berlin airport, but it's an AOT building there. So it's a public building there.
Any other questions for Jane? I think we're over to you, Colin.
Great, thanks, Jared. So I guess I'll start off with the life cycle analysis and that contract, and I'm excited to say that it has officially started that process, and we just had our kickoff meeting for that yesterday, which was exciting and great to talk to our contractor, who is ERG, and we kind of went over the scope and some logistics and a few of the kind of high level energy pathways to look at, with a lot more to come later in the process, and discussed very briefly with meetings to be scheduled in the future about how to potentially do some outreach, especially related to traditional ecological knowledge, and how we might be able to incorporate that either into this analysis or potentially a future analysis with a little bit slightly different, not so emissions centric focus. So that's kind of where we are. So just had the kickoff meeting, and I guess in terms of the timeline, ERG is going to be working to put together kind of a methodologies document, so looking into a bunch of literature and tools to come up with emission factors, and discuss with us the different energy pathways for the state by, hold on, I have it written down so I don't mess it up here, kind of March through the end of May, and then in June through the end of July, they're going to kind of use those factors to kind of create an inventory. So kind of apply those to the Vermont specific totals to come up with some hopefully matching inventory sector totals for comparison. And that's going to be interesting to see how that all fits together, because the life cycle framework is not totally compatible with the in-boundary framework, but we're going to work through that with them and hopefully come up with a useful product that provides some interesting and helpful information. I guess that's probably about all I'll say on that, unless there are other questions specifically on that. But we will be kind of talking through the life cycle task group engagement in that process, and we haven't kind of made any totally solid decisions on that yet, but they will certainly be involved in kind of reviewing some of the major components of that. So, Ken, go ahead.
Yeah, my question is whether you have an understanding or kind of a vision on the topic of woody biomass, whether their product will lead to a quantification, maybe depending upon the source of woody biomass, for its greenhouse gas emissions as they should be considered. And I understand that, the challenge of looking at the inventory, but for another, for edification of the overall Climate Council purpose, to what extent do you think they're going to be coming up with a quantification for woody biomass?
Well, that's certainly one of, or maybe even a couple of energy pathways that they're going to be analyzing. So yes, I think they will. And I think some of the idea right now is to have kind of two separate pieces. So conduct the analysis kind of including the biogenic component, and then having it split out to not include it if you wanted to look at it that way. And so having both of those numbers, we need to talk through it more with them, but we totally understand that it's a huge topic right now, and it's very important to nail down. And so yeah, we're gonna look at it both ways, and yes, hopefully they will come up with a quantification. I guess we're also going to have to kind of dig into and explore the data sets that they're going to be basing it on, because at least the data I've seen is not fantastic. And I'm sure we'll kind of loop in Ali Kasiba for her input on some of the data sources and things like that. But I guess that would be my answer is yes. The plan is to have them analyze those pathways.
So I have two kind of process related questions. One is I understand that there was the kickoff meeting with the consultant and ANR, or Climate Action Office staff. It seems to me it's also really important to have an early meeting with the task group in terms of meeting the consultants, talking about scope, being aware of that timeline, and providing some initial feedback. I'm wondering if you can share any information about that timeline and meeting. And then the other thing I want to just pause on is, since we have some new committee members and there's just been changes in the subcommittee composition, I want to just pause and share with folks what the composition of the group that was looking into these questions previously was, and see if there's anyone else from this subcommittee who has an interest in joining that conversation. I know that Colin and Brian were participating from ANR staff, and then Richard and myself. I think Claire, were you part of those conversations as well on behalf of PSD? But if I'm missing some, I apologize. But let's pause to see if there's anybody else who wants to be a part of that task group as we go through that review process.
I guess I would just, to fine tune that, Jared, just so you know, for the client, I've been managing our contracts within the climate office. So Colin and I are managing this one jointly. And then Megan also is on the sort of like helping with from the climate action office side. So the three of us will be the sort of ongoing ANR staff that meet with the consultants for the biweekly check-ins. And then just a reminder that also Ryan Patch and Judy Dow from Ag and Eco are also on the task group.
Yes. Looking at who on this screen, but yes, those are important additions. Richard, are you good to continue in that role? Great. And I certainly am. Is there anybody else who would like to be a part of those task group conversations, especially if there is a background or expertise and interest in life cycle emissions analysis? Well, with that, I think we can go, unless there are any other questions or comments, I think we can move to the next update on the Municipal Vulnerability Index, RFP from you, Jane.
Just one follow-up, Jared, on your question about engagement with the task group. And I just want to say that, so we had, but the way that we've set it up with ERG is we have bi-weekly check-ins with them. And then we also have an additional one next week, because one of the components that feels like parallel but informing the life cycle analysis is this traditional ecological knowledge scoping document, which I said this yesterday at the kickoff meeting, and I'll just say it again for all of you. I'm still struggling with calling it like traditional ecological knowledge. That's where we landed, but to me, it's really about like understanding implications of energy choices on parameters outside of necessarily emissions. Like, so thinking about like wood as an example, like having other factors that come into play that are like socioeconomic or biodiversity based, like trying to think about what are the impacts of our energy choices are outside and how you would evaluate those additional criteria within a life cycle framework. Anyway, we have within the sort of process or contractual agreement with ERG, we have these stakeholder meetings. And specifically, as part of those stakeholder meetings, they were going to reach out with stakeholders to ask them about the process and what we were thinking about doing. And I specifically highlighted that to me, like how they would engage was with the building, with the, I almost called you guys the buildings thermal task group, but there's so many task groups, the life cycle analysis task group, and then also just transitions would be the other sort of two key stakeholders around the TEK sort of plan, scoping plan. But as part of that conversation next week, I emailed the project manager for that component and specifically said, let's have a conversation with us about where are the right touch points along the way and how does it work with your schedule to engage the task group. So I think once we meet with them specifically a little bit more on how they're broadening the tent on who's engaged in this work next week, we should be able to clearly articulate a plan for the touch points with the task group. And I certainly appreciate early in the process to ensure we're on the right path makes sense. So just want to highlight that I heard that.
That sounds good to me, Jane. The other thing I want to just pause on though is, I don't have it right in front of me, but my recollection of the scope of work in the RFP was identifying that early on, we really need to be clear about definitions and kind of boundaries of analysis. Is this life cycle analysis? Is it combustion plus pre-combustion emissions? And so my hope, and I know that we had said in the RFP that the task group and perhaps other kind of stakeholders or folks who want to provide comment on that would be involved early up front before that is kind of finalized. So that seems to me like another early important opportunity for at least for the task group to get together and begin that discussion, and then probably have a broader discussion about definitions and boundaries so that we understand that, so we get on the same page and we understand the implications of those different definitions and boundary choices. So I think
they were going to work on that for our meeting for 2 weeks from now, Colin,
to
right?
try to frame that
something that
I think
maybe
so, yeah.
Colin and I will touch base after this and figure out if it makes sense to have a meeting with state staff on that in 2 weeks, or how to manage it, like just make that meeting inclusive with the task group. So we'll circle back, but I certainly appreciate that makes a lot of sense. So thank you. And that's, of course, the value of having the task group to help us with those kinds of things. So yes, thank you.
Yeah, if the timing works out for the task group to just join that's great. But I think it's very important that at the beginning, the task group is involved in those conversations about definitions and boundaries. So.
Great.
Elizabeth.
Thank you. So I'm trying to figure out, I guess I said in the last meeting that I'd like to support a task group and find a way to support more of the work as a new member and to expedite my learning. And I'm looking at an onboarding slide that was part of my some of those initial conversations as I came on to this subcommittee, and I see some task groups, but then Jane, I think I just heard you say something about a buildings task group that I don't see on here. So I guess I'm just trying to figure out where I can have the most impact, and maybe we could even discuss that offline, kind of where I should step in based on my expertise and where I can bring value. Because I can't, I just want to be precise about how I do this and make sure I have a good understanding of what's available and where I can be helpful.
That's great, Elizabeth. And I think all of the contracts we're going to talk through today have task groups associated with them. And so as we go through today, the updates, these are the ones that sort of are germane to science and data. And we'll sort of happy to sort of have a more detailed offline conversation with you too about where your expertise is best suited after we go through these updates today.
Great, perfect, thank you.
I'm happy to talk about municipal vulnerabilities now, it's right.
That's great. Thanks.
So as a reminder for all of you, and then to orient Elizabeth and others who are newer to the conversation, we're required by the Global Warming Solutions Act to develop a municipal vulnerability index tool. And it will look at first and foremost resilience and adaptation, so largely hazard vulnerabilities within towns in Vermont, but also overlaying and being informed by socioeconomic data. And so we put out an RFP for that really describes that in detail, and the stakeholder engagement that will also happen around that development of that tool. And we really see it as foundational in helping support municipalities in ultimately climate planning, resilience and adaptation planning, helping them ultimately be a precursor to securing funds to do that work in their towns. And so that has been, again, just very slow through the sort of state government channels of expediting, but the contract is all done and it's just at that final stage sitting with the AG's office right now. It's been executed on our end, and once it comes back from the AG, it goes to the contractor to sign, and they've fully vetted it back and forth with us. So no anticipated questions, but I got an update yesterday that our business director was going to poke the AG's office a little bit to try to get that back, and we will begin that work in the coming weeks. And so that one will have it has a cross-cutting task group with members from this committee. Jared Ulmer and Dr. Leslie Ann is also on that here. And then there's members from Just Transitions on that committee, Carrie Hengstenberg, who also works at DEC, and also members from Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee, as that's actually the tool in the GWSA is articulated to come from that subcommittee. And so that's a really exciting one. And I think we'll have a lot of expertise in sustainability and working with towns and communities. And so excited to get that going, but just haven't quite yet.
Great. Jay, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to lean in on being more involved with that. And then just a general comment, taking my knowledge of software development around clients and customers, and maybe this is getting too far into the weeds, but have there been communities or end users or power users that have been identified to help build this around? We have a lot of subject matter knowledge that's guiding from the top, but I'm just trying to understand the process a little bit more from that perspective. Thank you.
So I think so it's going to be an ArcGIS based tool that's built. I can't remember the exact platform that they're using, but the Esri product. But Eric Engstrom, if you've had the chance of working with him, he is our GIS sort of guru that works with ANR quite often to put together the BioFinder and things like that on our website. I'm trying to think of other examples. I don't know if he worked with you, Jared, at Ulmer at all with the health index, but he's really great. He helped us pick the contractor, worked really closely with the contractor on the language around the technology and platform, and he'll be critical in sort of moving forward the development of the Municipal Vulnerability Index.
Just one follow-up point, just to say it out loud, that'll only be as good as it's the knowledge and understanding of risk and vulnerability that currently exists as it's being fit to that too. So there's definitely a lot of opportunity here to do better. And I don't know, at least on the power system side and risks to the energy side, that's something I'd like to be involved with.
That sounds great. Yeah, and I know Leslie Ann was really helpful in helping us select. She was on the task group that helped us select the contractor in this space. And I know, I don't want to speak for you, Leslie Ann, but Leslie Ann really articulated brought strong support for the contractor we went with because of their familiarity and linkage to really good national data sets too, that I think had scale and applicability here in Vermont. And so being able to link to bigger tools out of here too, while also having local context.
So it sounds like, just to pause, that I understand, Jane, based on what you said, that there's folks from other subcommittees who are part of that cross-cutting task group, but from this subcommittee, it sounds like it's Jared, Leslie, and now Jay. That sounds great. Thanks. All right. Any other comments or questions about the Municipal Vulnerability Index?
Jared and Jane, this is Jared Ulmer. Just to clarify, I am not on that task group. David Grass from Health is on that task group. I'm on the municipal, or the Municipal Climate Toolkit. I can't ever keep all the names straight. I'm on that other toolkit task group.
Thanks, Jared. Okay, Colin, I think it's back to you on the agricultural emissions RFP.
Sure. Thanks, Jared. I don't have a whole lot of update on that. We're still in the process of reviewing the contract. I think we're getting a little bit closer there. I don't know, Jane, if you maybe have a better sense of the overall timeline before that actually gets executed. I need to take another look at it, and then I think it has to go through at least one more level of review. But hopefully soon, I guess I'll say.
Yeah, I mean, it's just apologies on, there were 2 proposals that we received, and if we didn't update you on that, we selected, worked really closely with the ag agency who has a vested interest in this to make the selection of the contractor. The sort of choice was a larger consultant who had a very in-depth knowledge of the SIT module, perhaps built the SIT module and like works in that data really well. And then another contractor who had much more local knowledge of data. And we, I think we may have said this at the last meeting, but we took out what we had envisioned, one of the tasks, which was in sort of going all the way and like using whatever the tool is we choose to advance as a new or refined set of tools to measure and track the ag emissions sector, and took that out because we thought it was better to build a more robust contract with the limited money we had around sort of review of data sets, review of tools, and relationship with the contractor actually, because we thought that professional experience that they were going to bring was more invaluable than almost anything else. And so, so we have the contract lagged with me for a while, and I sent it to Colin to proof my work, and Colin's going to do that, and then it goes through our legal business office team. And it's a pretty straightforward contract because it's only 2 tasks. So hopefully I didn't blow it so badly with that. Messy. Hopefully it'll be quick from here on out.
That's great. Thanks for elaborating there too, Jane. That was helpful. I should have done that. But I was thinking that I had already provided that, but it's probably been a while. So definitely a good refresher there. Thank you.
And
Sorry, go
Colin,
ahead,
I can just ask, just to pause. I think this is a good time just to like take stock and say, okay, where are we? And then like, who are the folks on the task groups for each of these? It sounds like there's not quite yet the work to do there in terms of review. But do you want to just say anything about the composition of that task group when it is ready, and just pause to see who from this subcommittee is on that, or if there is interest?
Yes, but I would actually need to pull up that list of who was on that task group. Ryan Patch is certainly on there. I can't remember if is Judy on that one too, Jane? Do you? Not, no, just the life cycle one. Yeah, I
think technically it's a lot of ag and eco people, and less science and data. So I think the only science and data is you, Colin, and Megan. And Megan's not technically on this committee anymore. So you, I think, would be the only one actually. And then Abby Course, Alyssa White, Ryan Patch, Justin, and us. So for folks who aren't as familiar with that, there's criticism about the way we track the ag emissions sector, largely around it being a very coarse tool to look at both gross emissions and net emissions. There's a sort of jury out on where we go with the tool and net emissions, but our inventory tracks gross emissions, and the question is, are there better tools to calculate both gross emissions and net emissions, and can you pull those apart essentially, and what data exists to do that? So that's really what it's about. It's about and ensuring that through those tools we're able to sort of account for specifically in a gross emission way, but perhaps in a net emission way, the benefits that farmers provide for greenhouse gas mitigation through the sort of co-benefits of other practices that they're already putting on their farms, like cover cropping, manure management, things like that.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. And yeah, just to reiterate that the comment from the Ag Agency that they make the most consistently is the capturing the management practices and how the SIT module, this state inventory tool the EPA puts out, doesn't do that. But also, as you mentioned, the net framework as well.
I guess one just thought I would offer is that to the extent that we can get more accurate, refined, less coarse data in terms of measuring gross emissions from the ag sector and figuring out how to capture the effective management practices, that seems very straightforward and all good. I would just flag that the extent to which that conversation moves into a gross versus net conversation, I think that is very much interlinked with the task groups that have been looking at the inventory and the life cycle analysis. And I just want to pause to share my perspective that I think that's a much bigger question that shouldn't just be handled by that task group. So the extent to which that becomes a future question, I just want to make sure that it's the intent to link that with other conversations in other task groups that have been looking at emissions, and this whole subcommittee, because those are interlinked, and that's a much bigger, very important question.
100%. And I think Colin today, when he gives an update on where we are with the inventory, we'll also talk about a separate methodology document that he's developed, and are thinking of how to work going forward about how we would engage with the subcommittee more generally on methodology changes to the inventory, so that there's a public process around that, which we're interested in thinking about.
Yes.
All right, I think the next one up is Brian on the buildings and thermal RFP.
Yes, thank you, Jared. And then for new members and folks on the recording, I'm Brian Woods, and I'm a member of the Climate Action Office with Jane and Colin and a few other folks. And so I've been working on the buildings thermal energy policy analysis contract. This, again, for a little background, this is an effort to look at policies that could help result in reductions in greenhouse gas emissions from the building thermal policy, some that are under active consideration and others that are potentially approaches to be able to get those results. This is funded by ANR. The RFP went out last year. We are under contract as of January 10th, so it's fully executed. The contractor is the Energy Futures Group, working with Cadmus and the Stockholm Environment Institute. Those are the folks that run the experts on the LEAP model. And the scope of work includes an initial qualitative analysis of policy options. And we're working with the contractor, and we being the state team is composed of folks from ANR, from the Climate Action Office, and from the Public Service Department. And we developed a list of 21 proposed policies or policy options for this qualitative analysis. And they include things like expansion of the existing programs. There's a number of them that exist right now, pollution pricing, market-based approaches, performance standards for fuels, appliances, and buildings, and direct regulation of emitters. Those are broad categories of the things that we're looking at right now. And the qualitative analysis is going to look at those policy options under several criteria: the ability to confidently achieve the emissions reductions in the sector, the cost per ton reductions, economic and health effects, implementation feasibility, and the ability to address equity issues. We expect that deliverable, that final deliverable is coming next week. And we'll be using the results of that qualitative analysis, just like a favorable, more favorable, most favorable, based on those criteria, as a guide to select what are going to be under the contract, the 5 policy or policy sets that are going to go through a quantitative analysis. The deliverables also include, this may be of interest to some folks, they include an update of the Vermont LEAP model. So that's the model that was used as the basis for the Pathways report. If folks have read the Climate Action Plan, or the Pathways report was a separate deliverable, a view of where we are and where we are going with emissions on a sector by sector basis out of this model. This contract will update that baseline model to include the latest adoption levels of low emitting technologies, things like heat pumps and heat pump water heaters, impact of new policies and programs, particularly on the federal level, but also the Weatherization Act and Advanced Clean Cars 2 and Advanced Clean Trucks that we have adopted here in Vermont. Changes in economic and demographic conditions and forecasts since the last model, and then a validation of the baseline and reference case scenario to the state energy data system that is used for the inventory. So we're working really well with the contractor. Like I said, we're underway. The contract started in January. The final report with the full analysis will be available in late May, perhaps in early June. I've been in touch with the task group, notifying them that this is underway. That is Christine Donovan, David Farnsworth, Rich Cowart, and yourself, Jared, at this point. And as Jane indicated, we are, like I said, I've been in touch with them, and as Jane indicated, we are need to touch base internally as to the engagement points for the task group on the work that we're doing. And I think we want to do that here sooner rather than later, as we get through this first phase of the work.
I just have two questions, Brian. One is just a timeline question, and that is, I'm assuming, tell me if I'm wrong, that whole second scope of work around the update of the LEAP model, the updated baselines and reference case, that's going to accompany the final report in May and wouldn't be part of, is it part of that first qualitative analysis? Okay.
In the middle. It's in the
Oh,
middle.
it's in the middle. Okay.
It's a separate task in the contract. And again, this is the update to the baseline scenario. And we expect that by the end of March. And then they'll use that baseline model in order to be able to do to support the quantitative analysis on the policy sets that are selected.
Great. And I'll just one other question, and then it looks like Ken's got his hand up. It sounds like we're coming right up on the timeline for the first deliverable in terms of the qualitative comparison of policy options. If I heard you right, there's already been a draft submitted and you're looking for the final deliverable soon. I just want to pause to say that I think it's really important that the task group have a chance to review that draft and provide comments before that is final. So I'm wondering if you have the suggested timeline at this point, or if we need to do that offline. But I just want to pause to say that I think it's very important that the task group review that draft and have the opportunity to ask questions and provide feedback before it's kind of final and done and we're on to the next piece.
Yeah, and we agree. And but we did want to, when we set up the schedule for the contract, we certainly wanted to make sure that we were moving expeditiously, through this process. Going back a little bit, this was when we originally went out to the RFP, which boy, Jane, I think this might have been as far back as August or September. There was, the concept was that this deliverable, this entire analysis might be available for the legislature to consider as they are deliberating the paths forward in this space. But clearly that, because of the time that it took to be able to go through the contracting process and get a contractor underway, and based on the schedule that I've given you for a deliverable, out in May, that's not really going to be happening. But we are trying to move through the first tasks expeditiously, but absolutely are interested in the task group's engagement. And for your information, we did set up the task 2 deliverable, that final qualitative analysis that's due next week.
And so at that point, the draft will be shared with the task group to review once that comes to you.
I think we can share the draft of the policy sets under consideration prior to that. Next week is.
I just want to make sure there's an opportunity to ask questions and provide feedback before a deliverable is finalized and a task group member, you know what
Yeah, Brian had asked me, and this is like maybe a little bit of an oversight, but I think we should I had been thinking that the first time we should pull the task group together was really the critical step of here are the 12 policies that we've looked at, and let's have the task group ensure that we're in agreement on how you build those policy sets. So what are we doing the quantitative analysis on? And but if what I'm hearing is there's interest in the qualitative analysis, which is a very straightforward analysis. So I hadn't really been thinking about that because we were moving so fast to get that done. But Brian and I, hearing and appreciating that, can probably all happen at once, sort of like reviewing the qualitative analysis and using that to provide input and have a discussion on the policy sets. Brian and I can work offline to attempt to schedule a task group meeting before that's due. The task 2, is that task 2, the qualitative analysis is due, and use that one meeting to sort of look at what the draft deliverable is for task 2, and use that to start to get the task group's input on the policy sets that we move forward with. Because for everybody's benefit here, who's not as deeply engaged in this, there are 12, I could be wrong, Brian, it might be 11, but roughly over 10 policies that we've discussed with the contractor. And those will be qualitatively assessed by criteria that were put forward in the contract and defined. Like there will be a memo that is attached, so you can say, well, what is a performance standard, and what's the difference between that and a cap and trade versus a cap and invest? Those kinds of questions. What do we mean by expansion of programs? And so that will have this attachment, and then from that we will pick 5 either sole independent policies, like just analyzing S5 as drafted, the Affordable Heat Act, or like a combination of policies would be a policy set. So like perhaps a carbon tax with expansion of programs, the funding source and so we have to build those policy sets to quantitatively analyze, and critical to have the buildings task group input on that. And so I think we can do it all at once, and just appreciate that. We apologize that the deadlines are moving fast and there's a lot happening, but Brian and I can talk right after this about scheduling that.
Thanks, Jane. Sounds good. I think Ken was next, and then Jared.
Yeah, my question is about the baseline, because I think in the pathways analysis, the baseline was I'll say problematic, and it becomes more so when we look at the policy options. And we'll use the Clean Heat Standard Affordable Heat Act as an example. Clean heat credits will arise from activities that are included in the baseline. The baseline includes a certain amount of weatherization, a certain amount of uptake of heat pumps. And so excluding that, basing the analysis beyond the baseline excludes activities that need to be understood, because in fact, these policies will probably influence the decisions that lead to the baseline. So I don't know if this has arisen as a discussion, but as I say, I think it was it was a real problem in the pathways analysis, because it was unclear as to how much of the policy was in addition to, or the relationship of the policy addition to the baseline and all those activities that take place within the baseline. So again, I hope this has arisen, and if not, I think we've got a real problem.
I think we can take that one offline, Ken. Like at a very high level, yes, particularly for the clean heat standard as it's proposed and the ability to earn credits this year, disentangling that from the effect of the policy is not straightforward. And I'm happy to talk to you outside of the meeting, because I see we're already over time on this.
Yeah, and Richard Fazy sent me a note, so I'll link you to my response to that. Maybe we'll have that discussion with Richard too.
That'd be really helpful. Thanks, Ken. Good to see you again.
And Jared.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Brian, for that info. And I really appreciate you mentioning health and equity as some of the considerations. And this is something we can also follow up with more offline if better, but I'd love to learn more about exactly how those are being considered and when in the process, and how I or others from health could provide some input, whether through this committee or the task group or some other means.
Yeah, just to review, for this first phase, this qualitative analysis, it's just like a very high level. A lot of these, many of these policies are going to work in the direction that we want them to. Greenhouse, for example, for health, we're reducing greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuels. We're also reducing, emissions of criteria pollutants. But for the first phase of that, it's just like, how, does it do that? And does one of these policies do that better than another policy without really trying to get into the, you know, the details of like how much better or anything like that. But then when we get into the next phase, into the qualitative assessment, we'll be, you know, having much more robust analysis of those things. So yeah, happy to talk with you a little bit more about how the qualitative analysis works, and you know, get your input on that. And then as we move into the next phase, you know, we're happy to have you engage on that as we work with the contractor on a much more detailed analysis.
Great, thanks, Brian. And I guess just quickly, I'll say emissions reduction related to improving air pollution, of course, important, and glad to hear that'll be part of it. I guess some of what I want to be able to make sure that's being flagged are some of the other connections between building thermal strategies and health, like some of the health benefits for occupants in homes being weatherized, or extreme heat resilience benefits for people installing heat pumps. You know, there are a lot of other considerations that I'd love to know are being accounted for in addition to the emissions reduction.
Yeah, sure thing. That greenhouse gas and criteria pollutants one is it's the easiest one for me to explain, like, to everybody. That's simple, but I understand what you're saying.
I think because part of what we're trying to do in the notes today is just make sure that we're clear and on the same page about the task groups and the composition. I just want to pause there, Jared, to ask you if you have a request to join that task group that's reviewing the drafts and the buildings and thermal RFP, or whether you want to just connect with Brian and others from the state team kind of directly offline about your questions and interest in this.
Thanks, Jared, for enabling that. I think I'll just start by connecting with Brian and then follow up from there. I don't want to over volunteer for task groups, but if Brian suggests that's an effective way for me to engage, then I can circle back on that.
Okay, thanks. All right. I think the next part of the agenda is the update on the or the overview of the potential A&R reporting program, and that's still with you, Brian.
Yes, it is, and I apologize. It was my goal to get you back on schedule, and that is not going to happen. But
we have a little bit of flex at the end, so
but I will try. And
Colin's good agenda drafting skills.
I will attempt to be succinct and efficient here. Folks that have been following this process know that, you know, we've been considering that, you know, through the climate action plan, you know, proposes a suite of activities and options, but any greenhouse gas reduction program where we're talking about regulating fuels requires data on those emissions to be able to build the program, and particularly emissions, data on the fuel type and, you know, how it's coming into the state. So Agency of Natural Resources, along with the Department of Motor Vehicles and Tax, are working together to utilize the existing fuel sales reporting authorities to develop data on the greenhouse gas emissions from heating and transportation fuels. And the concept is that this will avoid the need for ANR or any other entity that's going to be standing up a regulatory program to stand up a separate reporting obligation in addition to what entities are likely reporting to tax and DMV already, and avoid that duplicate reporting. It's more efficient, and, you know, if people aren't, you know, sending, you know, either hopefully they're sending the same numbers to people, but if they're sending them to different places, you can get different numbers. So this is a way to try and be the most efficient and gets the most accurate data possible. So we ANR already has data. DMV shares their data on transportation fuel deliveries under the terms of a memorandum of understanding that we negotiated with them in 2021, and those that data on transportation fuel is delivered to us annually, which is great, very helpful. We're having very productive conversation with folks at the tax department They collect data on, fuels that are taxed, heating fuels. A statute change is required to authorize the tax department to share their data. But in both cases, if ANR and or other organs of state government, like the Public Service Department or the Public Utilities Commission, are going to be getting this data, in any case that's required that the business confidential information would remain business confidential. So while these entities would be reporting like who they are and the volumes of fuel that they have, whoever would be getting this data would be required to maintain the business confidential portion of that, particularly to be able to identify a particular entity with a particular fuel volume, as that's confidential information. And we feel that there's ways to be able to report on emissions globally or with statewide without having to disclose exactly whose fuels are emitting exactly what portion and what volumes. In addition to the statute change, the effort's going to require some changes in the forms and supporting databases at DMV and tax in order to allow reporting of discrete fuel types and volumes. Some of the heating fuels that the data that the tax department has, heating fuels are all taxed at the same rate, and so they're reported as a group. So we're having a conversation with them saying, in order to be able to make this data usable to us, we just need people to break out by fuel type. Some of the data is reported in dollar sales and not volumes. Dollar sales doesn't really help us. So we're working on that as well. So this is all to say, I think we were making progress in this area, and ANR is taking the lead on drafting some session law to authorize the tax department to share its data with ANR, PSD, and the PUC. So this wouldn't be, this may not be all of the data that anybody would need. Using the clean heat standard in S5 as an example, there's probably some additional data that would need to be collected in order to be able to support that program. But this is still very important for us. We've heard this from other entities who have instituted greenhouse gas reduction strategies or regulations, that making sure that you have the data first is really very helpful in designing and efficiently standing up your program, and and trying to do this in a way with the existing authorities, we think has a lot of benefits.
Sorry, thank you, Jarrett. Thank you, Brian. Richard, I see your hand.
Yeah, I'm really glad you're working diligently on this, Brian. Some of you know that I live in Middlebury, Vermont, and I'm active with an organization called the Climate Economy Action Center of Addison County. Addison County includes 3 substantial villages: Vergennes, Bristol, and Middlebury, a lot of farmland and a lot of forest. With the help of a student intern, I have done 2 biennial greenhouse gas inventories for Addison County. The most recent one we issued a few months ago that carries the data through the year 2020. It's been extremely frustrating to not have gasoline and diesel motor vehicle fuel data available at a county level. There's no really good way to estimate it. We go a long way around from estimated vehicle miles to the fuel efficiency of the fleet to finally getting to estimates of gallons consumed locally for transportation. So whatever you're doing, if you can do it in such a way that one can disaggregate either the gallons sold or the tons of CO2 released at a county level, it would be extremely helpful to us and to anybody else who wants to do this kind of work at a sub-state level.
Thank you. I'll I'll see what we can do. I can't promise that we're going to be able to deliver that in the end.
Well, it would be very advantageous. With respect to propane, fuel oil, and kerosene, which as you observe are tallied together currently by the state, I'm a little happier with that because we can add up sales by dealers that are located in our county, knowing that those dealers sell some out of the county and the dealers out of the county sell some in the county. But I'm willing to take that risk in our estimation by adding up the number of gallons sold by dealers located in our county. It would be even better, of course, if we do where it was delivered. The fuel delivered to residences or building, commercial buildings or schools or factories that are located in our county would be even better. But I'm not although I'm somewhat concerned about the heating fuels, I'm much more concerned about the transportation fuels.
Thanks, Richard. Ken, I see you have your hand up as well.
Yeah, first, with regard to Richard's comment, a little caution. I believe the number is somewhere around 20% of all gasoline sales in Vermont is sold to out-of-state customers. And so you're going to have that issue amplified when you use county boundaries. What happens when people drive through Addison County? And I mean, not just what is the data, but how do you translate that data? That's going to be hard. As I say, it's hard enough at the state level because I say we have 20% of all of our transportation fuels are sold to out-of-state folks.
Right, and Vermonters buy fuel out of state as well. And the simplifying assumption that we make is that the amount of fuel bought out of county by county residents and the amount of fuel bought in county by non-county residents is going to balance out. We know that's not strictly true, but I have no way to know whether it's an overestimate or an underestimate. And so I'm happy living with it the way it is. The concern that you raise is legitimate. Of course it's legitimate. But I don't think it should paralyze us from trying to make estimates.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to paralyze. I just wanted to raise the issue that it will have to be dealt with, and whether your use of the VMT data really how closely that lines up, because the VMT data is collected well within the boundaries. But anyway, I don't want to slow you down or discourage the data collection from being more granular. I just wanted to raise that. But I raised my hand for a couple other reasons. One is, Brian, you said that you get now annual reports from DMV. How do those align with the reporting that's taken place for many years that JFO puts out, which is on a month-by-month basis on gasoline and diesel sales? So that's first question. And the second question is, it was about a year ago that there was a summary report on the heating fuels provided by the tax department. And there is a mathematical way, because of the way the data is reported, to differentiate propane and the fuel oils. So again, first question is their annual reporting the same as the JFO reporting, which is good? The JFO reporting is good because it's only about a 2-month lag. And then the second question is, that work that they did a year or so ago, is that replicable? And the reason I asked that second question, 2022 is a critical year because the price of fuel oil went up so significantly that it probably changed behaviors. And to understand I'm sure we will see a significant decline in fuel oil sales in 2022 will really help us understand some of those behaviors as we look at some of the programs to continue to reduce people's use of the fossil fuels.
Regarding the first question, it's the same data that JFO gets, but we get to see it by the distributor level, and it's broken out by product the way it is at JFO gasoline and diesel. And I can say it's getting those numbers to line up, I got them close because they report in a couple of different categories in the report I get from DMV, and in the JFO report, it's like all put together, but they're very close. But the difference is the JFO data is really helpful from an inventory standpoint, and Colin's using it now in order to be able to calculate the emissions from the transportation sector. But it doesn't tell you like who's bringing in what. And so for developing some kind of a regulatory program, it doesn't provide enough information. It also it puts together diesel and biofuels all together. And based upon we had this discussion about life cycle, depending upon how we're going to account for biofuels versus the way they're accounted for in the inventory, we need that broken out as well. And then the second question, yes, of course, as always, you're correct about they break out the propane and kerosene numbers. And I haven't seen the 2022 data for that yet. But I can say I haven't been looking for it because I've been busy doing some of this other stuff that you've been hearing about.
Well, I'm glad if you can jiggle the system, I would love to look at it. And so if there's any way to get that out, because I think it is absolutely, well, maybe not critical, but very, very informative. I think we will see a lot of evidence of people moving. Those folks that have multiple sources of heat in their home will have moved away from their fossil fuels, especially fuel oil. Propane didn't go up as much. But recognizing that will really help us understand the capacity of folks to do those changes as we move forward.
And I just want to acknowledge your observation about the state level data versus county level data. And Richard, we absolutely hear you. The focus here is to be able to develop a mechanism through the existing authorities in order to be able to have ANR and other folks collect this data, which is the first step towards developing regulations that'll help us meet the GWSA targets. But we are hearing loud and clear from both DMV and tax department, that this is not data that we are going to be able to share widely. And, and getting that kind of, getting the fuel breakouts, we're having a good conversation about that. Getting reports down to specific geographic levels, or public reports at, county or, finer grain than that, or at the entity level is, it's not something that we're focusing on, and that would be an issue with the folks that are really the custodians of that data. So, first step is to try and at least be able to see it for our purposes, to inform the work that we need to do and advance the conversation about other approaches that we need to take in order to be able to meet the GWSA targets.
I just want to pause to thank you, Brian, and everybody who's working on this for just like the really thorough due diligence about what data exists, how's it used, how can it be, more quickly accessed and utilized, and of course it's for different purposes, everything from greenhouse gas inventory tracking and reporting to potential kind of regulatory and reporting processes at a finer grain level than we need for a statewide inventory. I'm just wondering, I feel like there was a really helpful verbal overview of kind of what comes from JFO, what comes from DMV, or the same data does on different timelines and different formats, and then kind of some of the other. I'm just wondering if, just for those of us who didn't follow it, is there just kind of a summary of what you have found in terms of what exists, what doesn't exist, what you're using, what you want to use differently, what you want to have changed? Is there kind of an overview that kind of just explains that in one place that the committee could have to be aware of? Because I think it's really relevant whenever we talk about the inventory, whenever we talk about some of the tracking and reporting things that the subcommittee is involved with. Is there some is there a kind of a way that you've encapsulated the findings of what exists and what doesn't exist yet, or no?
Not in that way, no. Some of it is, looking at information that anybody can see. I mean, we started off by looking at, what are the applications or the reports that DMV and tax department require of regulated entities. And that's a really great way to say, here's what's available. And that, those are just websites. That's easy. And then, but we don't have all of that in one place that we could turn over right now. And like I said, this is still developing as a concept, and we're hopefully going to be able to come to some kind of a resolution on being able to collect this data, or collect existing data and use it in a little bit of different way, with a little help from other departments to be able to collect more discrete data that we need in order to be able to do this work.
We had some buffer time in the agenda. I think we're starting to lose it. So unless there's anything burning on this, I might suggest that we go to the next agenda item, which is Colin with an update on the inventory.
Sure. And thanks, Brian, for giving those overviews. That's great. So yes, for the inventory update, I will keep it relatively brief, but I have been working hard to get the inventory wrapped up here in the last couple of months, and it's essentially complete. It is going through some kind of additional review process right now, but I think it's getting close. I can't promise when it will actually be released, but I'm hoping in the next few weeks to month and a half, maybe. But yes, just in terms of kind of, Jane referenced some of this earlier when she was talking about it. We've kind of changed the format slightly. And so in the previous reports, it was kind of all together in one. And we made the decision this iteration to kind of split out more of the actual kind of values and a little kind of brief description of the sector from the actual methodologies and data sets. And so it's actually two different documents now. One that is much more streamlined and kind of has all the results, and one that describes kind of more in depth the tools and data sets that are used to come up with all of those different values. So I'll love to have you all look at that when it actually comes out, and hopefully soon, and would be happy to provide kind of some more detailed updates on that and kind of talk through some of it if people are interested in hearing that as well. I guess I'll just talk about a couple of some of the bigger changes in there. The first is the inclusion of a more complete land use change and forestry sector. And so these are still, that it's wading into the net realm to provide a net total. That is still not the official metric, but we wanted to try to get a better handle on that anyway, since we know it's an important consideration. And yeah, it's good to just have a better, more holistic understanding, especially of the land use change aspect of that, since forestry was really the only piece that we had incorporated into the inventory previously, at least in any detail. And so that's one big one. And a lot of those estimates come from, I can't remember when exactly it was released, but within the last year, EPA has downscaled national inventory estimates for all the sectors to each state. And so that is where that data has come from. And so also acknowledge that that is probably a pretty coarse estimate in a lot of those sectors. It's not, they have different methods for downscaling it, but and the methods they use for the national inventory are very sophisticated, but it's still kind of taking a large data set and shrinking it to Vermont. So yeah, but we did put those in there for the first time anyway. The other kind of big change that is in there right now is in the electric sector. And some of the totals in that sector have been updated. It's kind of a misunderstanding in some of that data that we were receiving from the Public Service Department previously related to the line loss and basing it on kind of retail sales instead of kind of the total sales. And so we were missing that component. And so we've gone back with Public Services help and added that in there. So a few of those sector totals, I believe it's 2016, 17, 18, 19 have been increased to reflect that the accounting for that line loss that we had missed previously. Those are kind of the ones that stand out right now, but like I said, certainly happy to go into more of the details of that when it comes out, and can talk about that, or if people have questions right now, I could answer those as well.
I might suggest, I just want to gauge interest in the committee. I think when it is ready, Colin, whether that's by our next subcommittee meeting or the one after that, I think it could be really valuable to take the time to have you present on it and have the committee be able to ask questions and be in discussion about it, both the overall findings and how those compare to prior years, and also some of the new ways that you're presenting both existing information and new information. I saw a thumbs up from Elizabeth and Richard, or head nodding. So, okay, great. So let's plan to incorporate that into the next agenda in which the timing makes sense. Great.
Sounds great. Richard, go ahead. You're on mute, Richard. Sorry.
I'm very much looking forward to seeing this. I understand something of what Colin is doing by trying to do the same thing on a county level, which is, there are some inherent limits as you get to smaller and smaller jurisdictions. Some parts of the process get more and more difficult. I just wanted to share with you all just one observation from some recent work here. The state inventory takes a boundary-based approach. That is, it accounts for the releases of greenhouse gases that occur in Vermont, with a couple of small exceptions, having to do with how we account for and then there were a couple of exceptions, not so small, having to do with how we account for emissions from electricity that is generated elsewhere, for example. In addition to working for the Climate Economy Action Center of Addison County, I'm also a member of the Middlebury Energy Committee, and we were asked to figure out how much greenhouse gases are emitted by our wastewater treatment plant here in Middlebury, and given various scenarios for upgrades to the plant. In particular, people have been excited about introducing an anaerobic digester into the wastewater treatment plant process that would it would do a couple of things for the town. Where the town currently spends $20,000 a month on electricity to dry and sterilize the solids from the plant, and it spends a couple $1,000s a month on lime that also is used in the heating and sterilization process. So if they could stop spending $25,000 or $30,000 a month, they would like to stop, and I, as a Middlebury taxpayer, would like them to stop. But they did ask us to say, well, what are the greenhouse impacts of installing this anaerobic digester? And one of pretty much all the plans that they have involve not using lime anymore. That is, that instead of taking delivery on 650 tons of lime every year, they wouldn't have to take delivery on any lime. Now, as long as they were just using the same amount of lime every year, we didn't have to think about it in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. It was part of our sort of baseline. But if they're going to stop using lime, then I mean, lime is a terribly bad actor with respect to the amount of carbon dioxide that's released in the manufacture of lime. You're taking calcium carbonate rock and heating it, first of all, which uses fossil fuels, and then driving off the CO2 to go from calcium carbonate to calcium oxide. So making lime is an extremely greenhouse gas intensive activity, and it happens somewhere else. It happens in Michigan or Maine or Georgia or somewhere. It doesn't actually happen, but when we think about the greenhouse gas consequences of various designs for our wastewater treatment plant, it seems to us like we need to take account of it, even though we're not doing a consumption-based inventory or a consumption-based approach. So I just tell this story because I've been a big fan of not doing consumption-based inventories for us here in Vermont. And yet here in this particular setting, it turns out that if we don't allow for the carbon dioxide production of the lime that occurs somewhere else, that we're missing a big part of the story in making decisions about our wastewater treatment plant. So it's just such a cautionary tale. And we need to be alert for other places where in doing a boundary-based inventory, we may be missing some important aspects of our impact on greenhouse gases.
Thank you, Richard. A good specific example of the challenges of boundary choices for sure. I think at this point, unless there's anything else that sounds like we're going to have more time in future meetings on the inventory. So unless there's anything else that's burning question that folks have about that, let's move on to the updates from some subcommittee liaisons. And I think Colin and maybe Ken wanted to frame up a discussion about kind of communication with other subcommittees. I will just say briefly to kick off on the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee, certainly our last meeting, maybe even perhaps the last two meetings have been canceled and rescheduled. So there's I do not have an update from the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee. So that is pretty straightforward. The next meeting on the calendar is Thursday, February 16th. And I will bring back any news from them and share any relevant news from us with them at that point. Who would like to go next? I wonder, Dr. Dupini-Giroux or Dr. Schaefer, either of you on rural resilience?
I could go real quick. Yeah, I don't have too much to add. Rural resilience did meet first week of December. I was absent, but the Municipal Vulnerability Index and a presentation was made by the Sea Grant Lake Champlain program, part of the extension program, and they had done a pretty extensive survey on towns and had a lot of information around flood resilience and water. I think that'll help inform the Municipal Vulnerability Index. I'm going to follow up with them on what that looks like. That's about it. Thanks.
And I don't have anything really to add because I think Jane covered a lot of the material as she was going through some of the earlier pieces in there. Plus, it's kind of hard to take notes and talk and turn on my mic at the same time. So we're good.
Thank you. Okay, maybe just transitions, Kashka or Claire, I believe, are our liaisons there.
I can start, and Kashka, if you're there, please feel free to fill in, but Just Transitions met at the beginning of January. I think the primary takeaway from that meeting is that subcommittee has really been trying for a lot of the last year. It feels like to find what its role is in the implementation phase of the climate action plan. So we discussed a draft memo that one of the co-chairs and some committee members had written up that tried to outline what Just Transitions felt like its role was based on some of the statutory language in GWSA and how to ensure kind of the guiding principles and the tools that have come out of that subcommittee are integrated throughout the processes ongoing in the council's work. So I don't believe that document was posted. There was some live editing, and I know there was going to be another draft circulated at some point that would eventually be shared, I think, either with the council or other subcommittees, which Jane could maybe remembers where we landed on that. But I think that's a primary update from Just Transitions, unless you have something to add, Kashka.
Can you guys hear me? I'm having a tough time turning on my camera here.
Yeah, we can. I can hear you. I assume others can.
Okay, great. Hi. What a great meeting. So the only thing that I have at this time is, with Just Transitions, we've been really trying to kind of hone down on the role of Just Transitions within the scope of the other subcommittees and within the Climate Council. And basically, we want to make sure to be a resource for all of you and for all the other subcommittees in terms of making sure to, use the guiding principles and the rubric, which can be really difficult at times, especially when you have so many other things going on. So we want to make sure and be a resource for that so that, your T's are crossed, your I's are dotted, and at least, you have our ear on whatever aspects need to be looked at. And any expertise that you might need from our subcommittee, we are here to help. So I think that's the major takeaway that I want to share with you all. I don't know if Jane or Claire wants to add to that, but I think that's something that's important. And especially what's going on lately, I think going forward, we're going to try to do things better. That's all I got.
Thanks, Kashka.
Sure.
Sorry, I didn't raise my hand, but I was just going to add that because it involves the work of some of your committee members, that the interest from Just Transitions was to try out sort of the recommendations that they put forward in their memo to the council on biomass. And so the idea being that even though Just Transitions has liaisons working on task groups to formulate substantive recommendations for the council, there was an interest in ensuring that the equity scoring rubric was applied to those recommendations before they went to the council, and to do those in a publicly vetted meeting. And so Chase Whiting is the liaison from Just Transitions on the biomass task group, and he offered to sort of pull together a small group of the task group to sort of go through the recommendations, score them using the rubric, and then the whole task group is invited to the Just Transitions meeting on February 16th to sort of talk about that process and the recommendations to carry that up to when the council discusses them.
Thanks, Jane. I think the last subcommittee is Ag. I don't know, Colin, I know you sometimes participate in those conversations, but not regularly, right? Okay, is there anybody who is participating in the agriculture, ag and ecosystem?
They haven't, I think they may have only met once or twice since the plan was adopted. Okay. They're not meeting very often.
Okay.
But they have active roles in the different task groups.
Colin, did you want to bring up the point that went along with the other part of this agenda item?
Sure. Yeah, and Ken, feel free to elaborate. This is from a note that Ken sent me on the agenda a while ago, but it was about kind of, I guess, just a discussion amongst us, and I thought it fit well with the subcommittee liaisons piece to kind of make sure that coordination with the other subcommittees is happening in a way that we can best be helpful to them and kind of lend a hand with technical questions, things like that. And Ken, please change up what I'm saying if I'm getting wrong what you meant, but that was my take on it, and I think that's an important thing as well, and a good thing to flag. So
Yeah, I guess I did have a little different perspective, and that is the various work products that we are overseeing as one of the committees. And granted, I'm not as engaged overall with the Climate Council as others, but I just not always sure that analysis that we're helping to oversee is addressing the needs of the Climate Council. And I'm going to throw out a specific recent example, which also is, whether it's a communication or just my lack of understanding of the structure. And that is, we have the Climate Council, we have the Climate Office, and the Climate Office is within ANR. And last week, Secretary Moore gave testimony on the sort of the impact, the potential impacts of the clean heat standard and what clean heat credits were worth. And it's just curious how that information that this body oversees feeds into the Climate Office, feeds into the Secretary of Natural Resources sort of summary of impacts. And I know that may be a little touchy, and I apologize, but it to me, it highlights, I don't care about the specifics of that testimony so much, but it highlights to me, where do we fit? And what is that relationship of the analytic products that we're overseeing with the Climate Office, with the Climate Council? And again, when I sent the note initially to Colin, it was, how do we make sure that the Climate Council is being as clear as they can with regards to the analytic needs, so that when we're reviewing products, we know we're really meeting what's going to help the Climate Council move forward.
Thanks, Ken. I think it's a good reminder, especially for all of us who are liaisons with other subcommittees, to be kind of have our ears open and kind of listening for data questions, analysis questions. Not that kind of like this is a ready group that can go ahead and do that, but I think in terms of a first point of contact of where might some information exist, or if there's kind of a potential for review that would fit into this subcommittee or a subcommittee, that could be really valuable. In the interest of time, we've got, I don't believe we actually, I think everybody who's on right now is a member of the subcommittee or state staff supporting the subcommittee. So I don't know as though we will have public comment, although it's possible someone will come on looking to provide public comment. But I think at this point, we should probably move to the next agenda item, unless there's anything else that Colin or Ken or anybody else wanted to say on the previous one. But I think we could move to the scheduling question.
I think that sounds good.
Colin, do you want to tee that up?
Sure. I guess in looking at the poll responses for a recurring meeting, I guess I just wanted to kind of touch base with you all. It looked like the best time that was going to work for the most people, actually it seemed like it worked for everybody, was Friday mornings from 9 to 10. Problem with that being that is only an hour, and after that we lose, let me see how many, but yeah, we lose at least 4 people, and apologies, I'm not sure if everybody has filled this poll out or not. Looks like a lot of you have, but maybe not all. So I guess I just wanted to kind of put out there, if we want to schedule a meeting Friday mornings, and I know in the last meeting we kind of decided probably once a month would be reasonable, and then we could do it more often as needed, depending on what happened to be going on at the time. Or if it would be preferable, I can certainly send out polls after every meeting to find the best time for folks kind of on an individual basis, which I would rather avoid if possible, but understand if that's people's preference, I can do that. So just wanted to see what everyone's thoughts were on that.
Colin, I'm so sorry to do this. I think I missed one of your polls or something.
That's okay.
And you should certainly not plan around a single person, but Friday will absolutely not work for me. It's the only day of the week that won't. So
Okay.
I'm sorry to screw up that plan.
That's all right.
I was just going to also echo for you, Colin, because you're kind, that I strongly encourage just setting a standing meeting date. It's just, from leading by example of trying to schedule busy people can come and go, but and can't always make all meetings. But I just think that we underestimate how difficult that is with people's schedules to try to do that every month. So I would just try to come up with a date that largely works for people and carry forward.
Okay.
Colin, I'm wondering, in terms of like how many people have, was it Friday was far and away was there one that was close behind that the addition of one or two people who haven't filling it out will matter? Or are we at this difficult point where we just can't find a time that works for everybody, so we need to figure out what's going to work for most? Or I just, not having seen the results of the poll, I'm just wondering.
Sure.
If you,
Yeah. So Friday, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 people. Everybody, all 9 people who filled it out are available 9 to 10. The next closest, we're missing at least, and the other problem is they're all only hour blocks. So the next closest, we're missing 2 people on Thursday at 1 and Monday at 1, both just for an hour. And after that, we drop down some more. So I'm happy to send it out again and see if we can find another time that might work for more folks, or we can go with Friday. Elizabeth, please.
I'll just offer, I empathize because I have done this with big groups of people, and it can be excruciating. But one approach I've taken with a big group of busy people is choosing 2 meeting times and swinging between them. And this is a very selfish request because I don't want to miss out, but maybe it's Friday 9 to 10 and then Thursday, whatever that block is, and you go back and forth so that there's some consistency and you don't have to be doing this every month, but that everybody can kind of stay connected in one way or another. So again, very selfish request, but that's worked in the past for me.
I'm fine with that approach if that works for everyone else.
and I like that approach.
Okay.
It's a little bit more equitable in terms of participation and
Yeah, sounds great. Well, I will plan on that then, and yeah, I'll put that together in the coming days and send out those invites.
okay. Sounds great. I don't.
So just to clarify, those are 1 hour blocks that you are going to have on hold, Colin?
Well, the meetings have always been 2 hours, so I will probably schedule them for 2 hours and just know that some people are going to have to drop after half of it. There were really no 2 hour blocks on there that looked reasonable for everybody.
And remind me again, the poll was in 1 hour blocks or 30-minute blocks?
Was it in when to meet? So it was just people selecting when they're.
Yeah, it was. I probably should have specified. I'm not sure if I specified or not for a 2 hour block. If I didn't, I apologize. Let me I will send it out again. I'll make another one, send it out again, and unless you just rather me take that and assume everybody filled it out just with their availability, knowing it was a 2-hour block or not, but.
Well, couple things. Some folks, especially the ones who might have polled later, may have selected only the time that they saw most people were available anyway, and not put the other ones. And
Okay.
then if you put half-an-hour blocks, then we could end up with a 30-minute sliding thing that we could choose from, as opposed to only starting on the hour. And that might also give a little bit more flexibility.
Gotcha. I did not in any way lock it. So I kind of just left the defaults. I'm honestly not sure if you can change them or not, but it is by half-hour blocks, I think, in there. But I don't think I specified in my request that the meeting was 2 hours, I guess.
Yeah, I think one more pass through might help us to kind of finesse that a little bit. So,
Okay, sure. Happy to do that.
thank you.
Absolutely.
All right. Is there any public comment? Doesn't look like we have any non-committee members, so not expecting it, but just did want to make sure to pause to say that. But with that, thank you, everybody. Oh, Jared.
Hey, sorry. Still on scheduling. As long as this doesn't overcomplicate for Colin and this is palatable to others, I might suggest, Colin, rather than repolling like half-an-hour blocks for the entire week. I mean, you could probably see the most promising windows of opportunity. You know, if you
Sure.
did any repolling, I might just focus on the ones that seem the most promising, to either validate those or, you know, solicit a few extra folks. But
Okay.
I imagine you're down to like 3 or 4
Yep.
possible slots. So if we just, you know, narrow in on those, that might make it easier for all of us.
That sounds great.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you especially to Leslie Ann for stepping up to take notes. I will look forward to doing it next time. Just in terms of process, I think that, right, if Leslie Ann, I guess if you can just send those to Colin, right?
So what I'll do is I'll rewrite them, because I'm on page 7 right now, and I don't think you want to have 7 pages of notes.
Thanks.
I appreciate that.
Well, until next time, it's great to see you all. I look forward to seeing you again at our next meeting, and everybody be well.
Stay warm,
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody. Bye.